As it reads, this is Seminar 2. The seminars are not for sale. This is the body of the research. If you're new here and or you haven't been paying attention, for 10 years, that's been my wilderness years, respectively. It began with me pulling my head out of my ass after spending most of my life doing what most of you are doing right now. It took a lot of dark shit in order for me to do that. And only after I did that did I figure out anything that remotely reflects reality. I'm going to show you a section in here. It's stuff that doesn't come up, typically speaking. Naturally, take it with a grain of salt. Some of this, or actually what this has to do with the subject matter is rooted in biblical bullshit. What most people haven't figured out is all religion is social control. All religion has been corrupted. Those narratives are in place to control the masses. It's one of the many tools or tactics or methods our masters have employed. And they work quite well. Now, with that in mind, if you had eyes to see, you'd be able to reason out what still reflects reality and is hidden in the religious texts, the clay tablets, the scrolls, etc., etc. But instead, you got people like Billy Carson, who's telling people that Thoth was an Atlantean, Thoth, T-H-O-T-H, and a number of other fucking horseshit agendas. So it's even muddier than it would be otherwise, because you have a bunch of celebrity puppets who, by all rights, are false prophets. It's one way you could dress it up to try to reason out what I'm getting at. And most people will defend that shit because they're thinking for the masses. In other words, they're spoon-feeding you paradigms. Adult fairy tales that go nowhere, mean nothing, and are fuck all. But most people haven't figured that out because most people aren't thinking for themselves. Feel free to read the words on the fucking screen. And understand, since I'm spoon-feeding this to you right now, this is not applicable.
Keywords. Laimxanzala's children, of which were 4 boys and 1 girl, are said to have founded the 4 major crafts of the world, found in the 4th chapter of Genesis 4:22. Eldest Jubal crafted geometry. Jubal crafted music. Jubal, father of shepherds. Tubal Cain crafted smith's ironwork. Sister Naarma crafted weaving. 2 stones, or columns, were fashioned to hold the knowledge of the past world, one of marble, as it would not burn, and the other made of clept laterns, for it was said to float and would not sink below the waters. The Temple Legend by Rudolf Steiner paints a different origin story for man. The builders were begotten from one of the primitive jinn, aka Elohim. This being married, even they bore a son named Cain. Max Heindel's Freemasonry and Catholicism may shed light on which of the jinn did so. Other texts assert that this jinn was not Yahweh. Consider the following when thinking of Max Heindel. The writer is not a Mason, and thus he is free to say what he knows without fear of violating obligations. But he is a Mason at heart and therefore frankly opposed to Catholicism. The Freemason is said to mean a con of fire and light. Max Heindel. As for creation, it said all was dark and hot, and Jehovah cooled the earth with water. Lucifer did not take to being cooled with water, and thus it rebelled. Lucifer and his army left the realm of earth for Mars. The ambassador of earth was Gabriel, and Samuel was that of Mars. Dear reader, where do we know the location of Venus today? Max Heindel states that Samuel mated with Eve, but he was forced to leave before the birth of Cain, and so Cain was born to a widow and a serpent of wisdom. Also appreciate that Eve was created long before Adam. Adoni, aka Jehovah, another of the primitive jinn, created Adam. This was done to unite him with Eve and create the family of Abel. Thus Cain's children were subject to their judgment because of Eve's transgression. Cain is a direct descendant of the GDs, whereas Abel is the offspring of Adam and Eve. Most tales agree that Cain murdered Abel and ostracized, unable to commune with YWHW aka YVHW, so on and so forth. In distant lands he founded his own race. Once more Adam and Eve mated through this union they had Seth. If this is true, two races developed, one of the GDs and the other of Adam, each of which Eve was their mother.
I want you to take to heart that I've been teaching people things for 10 years. For the most part, people have not given a flying fuck. You might be interested in pursuing information, so to speak. But if you're not willing to put in the time and reason things out, you're just as useless as all the other fucking duds out there. And that's really what most people fall into in terms of categories. Case in point, I moderate a lot of accounts. However, based on what I've been teaching people, you can see how many followers I have. Also keep in mind, I do remove people. But I've never had a flood, just tons of fucking people who have paid attention and caught on that I can teach you things unlike the other kids. That's never happened. Because I am systematically censored, and most people fall into that category that I alluded to. Now, TikTok, I've been fucking with, as the kids say, for a very short time. But I've been on Instagram for, at least the 10 years that I've been sorting out the research. And again, people haven't come out of the woodwork in droves, which is very telling in terms of quote-unquote reach. Same applies to YouTube, technically. I mean, I don't think I've ever broke 70 people, I think. I don't think the cap of 70 people has ever been reached on any of the YouTube channels. It's very telling. It also speaks to me wasting time and energy just trying to get through to people. Because I am looking for good people who can fucking think for themselves. But typically speaking, the interactions I have on the internet are not encouraging. Usually they're fucking upsetting. And the trouble with YouTube in particular, there's a number of people who are following those accounts. And I do not want those people in there. I don't want them to follow the account. Because they aren't willing to put in the time, but they're still fucking there. And there is no way to skim off the fucking fat, so to speak, and weed them out. And that's a fucking problem. Because those are the kids that are going to fucking dash out the door, piss in the pond, and fuck up the information. They're going to corrupt things. And there's quite a few who are still in there acting as voyeurs. I want to stress that. It's a fucking problem. I'm looking for people I can fucking trust, that I will reinstill faith in humanity. But really, I bet you 10 to 1 if you guys told me what your favorite music is. It'd be telling of what little you know and or the fact that you're unwilling to think for yourself. It's a shit way to put it, but 10 to 1, that's true. I watch what I pop into videos and usually we'll try to keep them on mute, but if I unmute it, what kids are listening to is disharmonious horse shit. And it's amazing that they consider that music. The same applies to the garbage storytelling in terms of movies. And most people probably don't take an issue with either of these two things that I just brought up. But they are a bigger deal than most people realize. And they're telling of the times. They're telling of the fact that most people don't have a fucking clue. They're superficial, by definition, through and fucking through. Which means they're fucking you and I up. And they don't realize it because they're so fucking hopelessly superficial. Really, they're two-dimensional. They're cardboard cutouts. Say you're walking down the sidewalk trying to go somewhere and there's just one after the other just standing in the fucking way. It's a shit analogy, but it's one way to try to understand how they're impeding what could otherwise benefit you and I. I'm referring to the information again, through really shitty fucking analogies. Yeah. And fucking TikTok's censoring the shit out of me again. But as always, what the fuck do I know? When I leave things like this online, I'll probably make it private. Because next to no one will see it. Most people won't give a fuck. and or some of the kids who have recently been just talking at me about fucking nonsense will chime in again. Instead of taking pause and leaving something thoughtful on the internet. You know, something that might reinstill faith in humanity and prove to me that you can think for yourself. You know, open your eyes instead of your mouth. Research instead of react. All that shit that I constantly rattle off. All right. This has been my tirade. I'm sure none of you care.
Where did Cain's wife come from? That's a good question, and I'm going to try to work through that a little bit here pretty quickly. My name is Pete Enns. I'm a biblical scholar, college professor, and also the co-host of the Bible for Normal People podcast. Let's get into this question, where did Cain's wife come from? And that's caused a lot of hand-wringing over the centuries for many people because it just doesn't make sense. If Adam and Eve are the first people created, so it seems, and they have children, Cain and Abel. Cain kills Abel, that leaves 3. And so if Cain is driven out of the land, where does his wife come from? You know, he becomes a wanderer and a fugitive, and he's in this other area and he picks up a wife and builds a city. It just doesn't make a lot of sense if you're thinking of Adam and Eve as the first 2 people. Where'd the wife come from, obviously. So one solution that's been proposed, which is not at all convincing, is that, well, he married one of his sisters as a wife. And there are 2 problems with that. First of all, Adam and Eve do have other children, according to chapter 5. That's the chapter after the Cain and Abel story. But these are children, I think, very clearly in context, born after all this business happened, right? First, they have this kid, Seth, sort of a replacement child for Cain, and then they go on to have other children, sons and daughters. And I think many people who want to try to read this literalistically, this story, they seize upon the fact that there were daughters born, so he married one of his daughters. But one problem with that really is that, are we to think that there are others who are also driven out of the area to go wander someplace in the land of Nod? And that's where Cain picked up his sister as his wife, right? There's no indication whatsoever, remotely in the text, that there are others who are sort of driven out, right? It's only Cain who's driven out. So that doesn't make much sense. Also, I think more importantly, after it is pronounced upon Cain by God that he would become a fugitive and a wanderer, the first thing out of Cain's mouth is, listen, if people find me, they're going to want to kill me. And so God says, no, that's not going to happen. He puts a mark on Cain so people know to, like, hands off, don't retaliate against him for what he did. But the problem is, who are these other people? Right? This is even before the whole Cain is marrying somebody from the land of Nod. There are clearly other people that Cain has to be concerned about. And that indicates that there's something going on in this narrative. And I think a clear indication of this story, both the posse that's coming after Cain and also the fact that there are people in another place called Nod where Cain can marry somebody and blah, blah, blah. All that indicates that there are clearly other people in existence at this time. It's not just Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel and Seth and whatever. So where did they come from? And here, I think a solution, if we just think out of the box a little bit, presents itself very, very clearly, and I think somewhat convincingly. The other people are those created in Genesis chapter 1. Genesis chapter 1 is a story of the creation of everything, and humanity en masse is created at the end of the 6th day. Male and female, God creates them, and they're fruitful and they multiply. There are all these sorts of people. The second story of creation, Genesis chapter 2, comes along and tells a different story entirely. It's not talking about the creation of all humanity, but it is talking about something else. And we'll get to that in a subsequent video. But for now, I think it's just enough to know that where did Cain get his wife from? There's no explanation that, for my taste, is remotely convincing other than, well, the presumption is there are other people already there, which means that Adam and Eve were not the only people, and Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel were not the only people. There are other people in existence.
Understand, if I wasn't being let down by most people that interact with me on a day-to-day fucking basis, I would feel comfortable teaching the internet things you're not supposed to know. That should go without saying, but most people don't think about it. And most people will they react poorly when they hear me barking at the internet. Think of it as a disclaimer statement, because you and I are surrounded by fucking idiots. They don't have to be that way, but that's how they conduct themselves, because they refuse to pull their head out of their ass and consider what the fuck is what. It's crazy. It's fucking crazy. Oh, here's a joke too, just based on my recent interactions. You could think of "we're all mad here," that type of crap, because it is a mad world, or realm rather. All right, so what I was gonna rattle off, and this is if memory serves me, and remember, it's a hot topic of debate. So in terms of Cain's wife, and again, if memory serves me well, take this with a grain of salt. But in the research, somewhere in the fucking research, it may still also be in Seminar 2, I'm not sure. I didn't keep looking, I just thought I'd rattle off something else earlier for you guys to stew on. And you may not be privy to the bit about the sun. I may omit that, I'm not sure yet. If you did see it, you're welcome. But most of you probably won't give a shit. So, back to point. So, you got Cain and you got Abel. They're both born, and they're both born with what? Can any of you answer this? Because this guy apparently was blissfully unaware of that. Who the fuck is this? Fuck off.
Wife come from?
It's fucking Saturday. It's 6 o'clock on Saturday. Who the fuck is calling me? I'm an asshole on the internet. No one should be calling me. It's gotta be spam. Back to point. Cain and Abel were born with twin sisters. Yeah? And the way that God, or whatever you want to dress it up as, God told them that what they were going to do is they were going to marry each other's sister. Cain wasn't allowed to fuck his sister, and Abel wasn't allowed to fuck his twin. Instead, they would marry each other's respective twins. But Cain didn't like that. So they both had twins, and they're supposed to fuck the opposite twin, but instead Cain went against those wishes and said that he was going to do whatever the fuck he wanted, and that's why he was condemned. That's why he was banished, sent to the land of Nod, or so to speak. And in some tellings, in some retellings, he was cursed. Very similar to, have you guys ever seen, read or seen some of the retellings of Clash of the Titans? There is a character in there, and I can't think of his name offhand, but in many ways, he is another version of what Cain represents. He's grotesque in his features, and again, he was ostracized or cast out, so to speak. And all that shit's supposed to speak to Cain. Now, the big thing that you need to take away from some of this, and this is a slippery slope. So when we talk about masters, when we talk about the people who are pulling our fucking strings, it is a group of people associated with technically a specific bloodline, but they have a bunch of minions. They have a bunch of morons who bought into this shit too, because they were promised power. They were promised, status. And it works, because people are easily manipulated. But this group of people may in fact either be the lineage of Cain, so to speak, the Canaanites, or however you want to look at that, and or a group of people who have circumvented. Let's think of ancient Egypt. They fucked and murdered their way into the royalty. And then what their modus operandi, the way they work, when they take over, and you can think of it this way. If you met them, they would lie to you. They would get inside. They would get inside your house. They would hang out with you. And then eventually they would murder you. And what they would do is adopt your last name. So the next place they went to, not like, what are those, is it shrimp? No, it's crabs. That pop on a new shell and take off. It's kind of like that. And they would adopt your last name. And the next person that they meet, they would introduce themselves as you. Adopting your identity. And that's how these fuckers work. So now is a great time to think about Canaan, Palestine, which is definitely censored on TikTok if I say these keywords. Usually you just hear Palestine, but let's think of it as the land of Canaan, Palestine. And what's going on there? And who's that other group of people? What are they up to? And why is that so fucking important? Why has that been stressed our entire lives, and far longer than that? And it reflects on this narrative, this thing that I'm bitching about in this goddamn video. It's connected. So whether you think what this guy's talking about, what I left on the internet today, any of the other shit doesn't hold water, there are people that believe in this. And it is connected to what is taking place today in modern times in a big fucking way. And the outline to where this leads is not a good thing. So if you're being told that everything's okay and everything's going to get better and there's going to be, wine and roses and good times and positive vibes only, that's not what our future entails. That's not what's right around the bend. And anybody with a brain in their head who chose to think for themselves would recognize this glaring fact and see it as a fucking problem. But most people don't know any of the things that I've already highlighted in this video, let alone things that I consider superficial that people should by all rights know. This is a little bit more cryptic, to say the very least. This is just one of the many tidbits in the research that's relevant to this shit. In other words, Seminar 2 has to do with misconceptions, mumbo jumbo, and mistranslations. Those are some of the 3 broad topics that Seminar 2 discusses. Now you got to take some of it with a grain of salt, but you got to familiarize yourself with the angles, because only by doing this with these different narratives and understanding these things and comparing and contrasting them might you be able to reason out where things are going and how it reflects on reality, let alone present day, what our masters are up to. Now that ties into Seminar 8, which is my most boring fucking seminar, and I hate it because all it discusses are the agendas that we are technically living through right now. So much of that I wrote before things even panned out, which is fucking terrifying to me. Because most people can't see these things coming. In other words, it has to do with politics, it has to do with religion, it has to do with, what was another one? Either way, hopefully you guys get the gist of it. It has to do with all the superficial shit that's going on today. However, when people talk about politics and religion, they're not talking about the superficial shit that I'm aware of and people don't know. They're repeating an adult fairy tale. They're repeating fucking nonsense. They're repeating a canned story that does not reflect reality, and by all rights is a corruption of what I could teach you and what you guys could have reasoned out on your own anyhow based on Seminar 8. Because that information is available to the general public in a large way. Even though Google's no longer a browser, a search engine, it's a tool of propaganda in case you don't have a fucking clue what I'm talking about, and or you've heard me rant before and you weren't paying attention, or you didn't take notes. Yeah. To that point, again, I'd love to have faith in people. I'd love to have more decent interactions with people than really fucking crummy ones that go nowhere, mean nothing, and waste my fucking time. Things that get me all worked up and or just make me laugh and sit back on my palms and say, what the fuck is this person even rattling off, and why the fuck did they take the time to do that in the first place? Are they trying to piss me off? Do they want me to kick them to the curb? Are they tired of being here? Do they want me to block them? And that doesn't apply to YouTube, of course, because YouTube's a piece of shit. You should be able to fucking remove these kids forever. You really should. All right, I'll digress. What the fuck do I know? If you hung out with me, thanks for hanging out. Blah 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 blah. And if I taught you something, feel free to throw me some bones, even though rarely fucking happens. Yeah. Someone recently did, and then it's ironic based on the interactions. It's still appreciated, but holy fucking shit. Why aren't people just using the brain between their ears? It's not much to ask, and it would benefit us all if people did. Again, we're living in a corrupted, disharmonious system right now. Through and fucking through. And it's getting worse. because that's the goal. That should concern you, but most people aren't concerned at all, apparently. Here's a superficial Google search. Keep in mind, you'll see the controversy between the two highlighted statements on here. It does list names as well. I've seen variations to these spellings. Also, take to heart that in terms of what you might think of as Hebrew or some of the other languages, in fact, too, you can spell them phonetically. But words do have power, based on the construction of the words, or the names, rather, in this case. There is power. That's also why there's been a corruption of the sequencing as well, but what the fuck do I know? Equally telling of the times, I don't suspect most people will have seen this post, let alone sat through this post because it wasn't a minute long. Our masters are doing away with attention spans. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to think about this guy. If it works.
Where did Keianh...
Did he mention, even, take it with a grain of salt, but did he mention the twins? Did he mention them by name? Did he call attention to that narrative? Did he contrast what he left on the internet with what I showed you? With something that is available to the public sphere. Now let's see how many people are following him. I have not clicked on this yet. Imagine that. One could surmise that he is not being censored because he's shopping around polarizing narratives that, by all rights, mislead the masses. What do I keep rattling off in regard to that? There are numerous people out there who are fucking us up, who technically don't know what they're talking about, and or they are purposely corrupting information. And most people will see these posts in their feed because they're being spoon-fed bullshit. However, what I leave online is systematically censored, whether you believe in that or not. You could jump into my Obsidian Monarch Instagram channel where I have highlighted some of those things in the highlights section, which nobody ever watches. And it's titled Censorship, if I'm not mistaken. There might even be my moniker and then censorship in there. I can't remember how I did it, but one of them does say censorship. Because a while back I had people telling me, I don't know, dude, I'm censored too. And I'm like, you got thousands of people following you. You clearly don't have a fucking clue. Because if you fucking went through these tactics, yeah. I've experienced things that I don't know anybody else who's run through in terms of censorship. It's fucking wild. If you start shopping around things that exclusively reflect reality, free of the fucking adult fairy tales, you will be censored on a level that will blow you away. But most people are never going to experience this. Most people don't care about this. Most people are not invested, which means they're not involved. This is when you say, what the fuck does he know? Clash of the Titans, Calabos. Feel free to consider this a spurious correlation, however it is in the programming. And it relates to mythology. Imagine things like this should be stressed as well, because in many ways it's a bad pun. It's a bad pun, since he was cursed to do what? Whoops. And apparently the browser is wandering as well. Fuck off! All right, we'll copy it. Curious, right? And note, these are just superficial Google searches. And it's good to think of the gesture, wouldn't you agree? Since we still use this word. You've heard of nodding off, right? How about this one? Give me a second. Life is but a dream. You ever heard of that? Is this a spurious correlation as well? I wish I could remember his name, but then again, this branches into a different topic related to this thought, having to do with the Vedics, the Indians, dots, not feathers. You could look into it. You could reason out what I'm getting at. Most people probably won't.